the second, you start to add in any extra stress to your body, you're going to freak out, freeze, go into that freeze state. If you go and try and do like a workout, for example, a training session, a weights training session, you're going to become very sympathetic and you're not going to be able to get back into that parasympathetic state, that flexible metabolic state where your body's like, okay, now we're not using the glucose directly anymore. So we can use, oxygen again, we're aerobic again, because you're supposed to be aerobic, 90% of your life. And you're supposed to then save the anaerobic for times when you really, really need it. But a lot of people just aren't flexible. So they're either stuck in that very sympathetic state, which I find a lot of times, or they just freeze. So anytime there's any stress added onto the body, if it's like a weight training session, or even like you said, they go for a walk or whatever, their body freezes. It doesn't know how to come in and out. You're supposed to be flexible, coming in and out of, the different types of energies that you use.
Welcome to The Body Never Lies. I'm your host, Leela Lutz. Each week, myself and experts from around the world help you uncover the secret ways your body communicates with you to empower you in your own individual health journey. So what if you exercise and you have a negative side effect to exercise? You might experience fatigue post-workout, odema, trouble sleeping, night sweats, or even DOMS for days. Or you might just be finding that you're not able to put on muscle mass or lose weight no matter how much or what type of exercise you do. Well, this is something I've seen in my work for 19 years, but it has been recently coined exercise intolerance in the pro-metabolic community, and along with it, it has stemmed a whole further list of myths like cardio is bad for you, and left a whole group of people feeling like they will never ever be able to deal with stress and go back to their full exercise routines. Another cohort is frustrated with the knowledge that to be healthy, you need muscle mass, but then anytime they push the weights, they are having these negative reactions. So what is it all about? Is there really such a thing as exercise intolerance? Why does it happen, and what do we do about it? Well, back on the show today is one of my favorite muscle building experts and nutritionists, Libby Wescombe. And today we're going to tell you everything you need to know about getting out of this funk. Oh, my beautiful friend Libby Wescombe is back. Thanks for coming back, Libby.
Thanks for having me again. So great. Our last one was so much fun.
I know I'm so excited for this one. Today we're talking about exercise intolerance, and we were just talking about it. It's interesting, like Libby and I never thought of it as a thing, exercise intolerance, right? Mm-hmm. Because from a science kind of perspective and an energy kind of perspective, we would recognize it as something else, but it's kind of been coined in the industry as exercise intolerance and given its own name, like it's a syndrome or a something, and I kind of like to think of syndromes as labels that people give things that they just haven't really understood the scientific holistic kind of thing of. So I think it'd be interesting to talk about like what are the symptoms that people are associating with this syndrome of exercise intolerance. Yeah. And we can both go through like our different clients and the messages that we're getting and the causes. So what are you seeing with your
So I tend to work sometimes with more type of women who were very, into training. They have high stress, and then they obviously developed issues from that discrepancy of energy. So, whether it's like, thyroid issues or, hypothalamic amenorrhea or whatever it is, like hair loss, and they kind of those pro-metabolic issues that people have when they then find pro-metabolic eating or, more, nourishing your body type of thing. So I often get the ones that have started like that, and then they found this type of eating or just fueling better, nourishing better, and they stopped all stress. So they stopped training while they were healing. They stopped, they even probably completely stopped movement for whatever reason because they were healing. And then it basically became time to add it back in, and they just could not get around the fact that they couldn't recover from it. So They may have added a lot of body weight as well in many cases, sometimes not even, sometimes just a little bit. So it might not necessarily always be related to extra body fat. I feel like sometimes it is related to that, but there's definitely been a shift. And I think sometimes it's in terms of that metabolic flexibility has gone. And they just cannot be flexible in terms of whether their body is burning glucose or whether their body is burning fat, which is what makes metabolic flexibility. And therefore, it's almost like they're stuck and they can't seem to recover. So they'll go and start training. They might add 1 strength training session, 2 strength training sessions, but they just can't recover anymore. So while they may have fixed certain aspects, like they may have improved their thyroid, they may have been able to add more calories, they may have, improved all their internal processes, their digestion and that, which is really awesome. They now have this other issue that they have to deal with.
Yeah. So I would say with my clients, I work with a lot of people who have quite complex thyroid and metabolic issues and need, interventions, like they're on thyroid medication or, and a lot because of my own experience with mold disease, and it's really prevalent in the mold community. And we'll go into why I think that is. And obviously that's a respiratory, it affects your respiratory system. So we could, understand that having all this mold that you can't detoxify in your body is going to make it more challenging for your aerobic system. But also I have a lot of clients who come from the pro-metabolic community and have put on 10, 20, 30 kilos and now have this fatigue and they stopped exercising somewhere because they were told that cardio was bad for them or too stressful for them. So sometimes it's hard to kind of pinpoint at what point they had a negative experience with exercise and decided that they might be suffering from this syndrome. Again, using the word syndrome, exercise intolerance.
Yeah.
But especially people with thyroid conditions, they experience a lot of things like odema when they're training. So they might come back from just a walk and all of their extremities are swollen. Like some of my girls say to me, my wedding ring's like choking my finger, And so they might experience also insomnia after training.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, massive night sweats. And just like some clients doing a session and being totally exhausted, like having to go and have a nap after training, or even just people going, I used to run and now I walk and I'm breathless, So I think there's varying degrees of exercise intolerance, but I would 100% agree with Libby that it is really about this struggling metabolism and metabolic inflexibility. I also see it a lot of people with things like type 2 diabetes. And insulin resistance. 100%. And again, that's coming back to that energy thing. And people who've been restricting certain food groups or low-calorie diet, low calories, whether they're plant-based or they're keto or anything that's super restricting in terms of macronutrients. I see it there. And also that's the other thing I see too, DOMs for days, like people training.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. I've only ever heard of that since I've been more involved in the pro-metabolic sphere. I've never heard of that in my years and years and years of coaching with CrossFit, which is where we would experience the craziest DOMs ever, from doing like 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and you'd be super sore, but you'd be sore for like 1 day, 2 days, and then you'd get over it. And it was literally, it's been like this whole new syndrome now. Like people literally have DOMs for 6 days. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
So that's definitely a big one for a lot of people that have come to work with me. And I've had to work hard on that with them too.
Yeah. So I'd say like it's normal, right, for 2 days after a new training program.
So when you first start, you can expect to be sore even up to like 3 days, 4 days when it's brand new, right? But if you're continuing to be consistent with your training, it should gradually go down the longer you train. And then when you add a new movement or you change your session, you'll then start to feel sore again for like a few days. But a lot of the women that have had this issue are saying no matter what they do, they get like extremes DOMs in, say, their quads, for example, no matter what they do. So they continue doing the program and it's just never going away. And it's like holding on So that's where I was like, there's like a bit more of something here. There's like an energy thing, you know, I feel like we can get into this later, but I'm like, you might be very anaerobic, very sympathetic, and your body is not able to go into that parasympathetic state, which is what actually drives the recovery. So it's just staying anaerobic, and it's just staying like you're not utilizing your energy properly to heal as well. So yeah, there's a lot to that too, I think.
There is. So yeah, I think like what Libby and I really want to do today is break it down for people, like the science of energy, because it's really about energy production and being able to have energy throughout the day, have energy for stress, but also energy for recovery, because your ability to have a positive adaptation to stress, like exercise, is dependent on your ability to be able to recover from the stress. So, and I think this is a really big thing that missed, and I think it's really sad, because I feel like it was our foundation of training, like doing exercise physiology and nutrition. It's like the foundation of training is understanding a couple of little scientific things that Libby and I are going to go through today. So I think all PTs should know this, all exercise physiologists, all nutritionists should know this, you know, and I don't want to shame people or anything, but we have to like come back to basics.
Yes.
You know, like I see too often with clients, I'm talking to there, I'm like, can you get your trainer to send me your program? And you know, let's work out why you're suffering from this. And they'll often say, well, my trainer doesn't have a program. They just make it up every week. Okay. So it's like red flag, number one. Number two is like, well, my trainer just smashes me every session, you know, or their definition of training is, oh, okay, well, I want to get fit, so I'm just going to go for a run. Or I want to get fit, so I'm going to go to F45 or Orange Theory or HIIT or something. So fitness means being able to get smashed, and that's the only way to get fit.
Yeah. So I think it's like that question of like, I was talking to my diamond members, and it's always that question of like, well, you know, that wasn't hard for me. Like I have this Pilates, and she was in the Pilates industry, and she was telling me how she has a really hard time with the girls that come to the class, because they're constantly like, this doesn't feel hard enough. This doesn't feel hard enough. And she's like, it's not about feeling hard enough. It's about doing the movement properly. And then you'll feel all the muscles working. So it's just this huge thing in the fitness industry, but it seeps into every industry. So it seeps into your Pilates and your yoga. You have your hot yoga and your Bikram yoga. And the whole point is to make it friggin' hard, to make the person wants to feel hard and sweat. And so just that whole thing in itself, I feel, is where the coaches and the trainers start to think that that's what the client wants. And to an extent that they're just trying to do what their client wants and give their client what they want. But they should, I feel like 100%, they need to be also educating their client in terms of what actually gets results, and that it's not just about smashing yourself to a pulp every single day. So, yeah.
I think this like really comes back to as well, like trainers, nutritionists, and all these kind of people really need to have a handle on the psychology of why people want to get smashed all the time, and that whole side of the industry. And we can come back and talk about that, because I think that's really important. But I see it with the whole pro-metabolic community that and I think there's a big message in terms of the psychology with this exercise intolerance thing, and that is that most people are adrenaline junkies, and they use exercise to get out of their body. And, you know, so you sort of have to get into this adrenaline state and this pain state to get out of your body, if that makes sense. And that becomes an addiction. And, you know, and it fits in with that whole life hustle, and it's all this no pain, no gain, you know, work till you die, like all this kind of thing. So we'll come back and talk about the emotion of it. But I really wanted to start with, let's talk about cellular respiration and metabolism. So I'm just going to let Libby do this, and I'm just going to geek out. But we're going to do basics of energy. Like, what is energy? Super basic.
So energy is basically, like Layla was saying, responsible for everything. So like when you're just sitting down, whether you're walking, whether you're pushing extremely hard in a race, whatever you're doing, you obviously need to have energy. And that's just your basic ATP, right? So Now, whether you're doing like a really hard exercise or an easier exercise, you're actually utilizing different things. So you're using, when you're doing like high intensity, you're using more glucose, right? And when you're doing more like aerobic, or when you're just day to day walking around, you're actually using more oxygen, right? So it actually ends up turning into different things as well. So when you're doing a higher intensity workout, you have to use glucose because you can't fuel that with oxygen. And you end up creating more waste products like lactic acid and that. When you're doing like a low intensity activity, or you're just walking around, you're using oxygen and you're creating carbon dioxide and water, which is like the quote unquote waste product, right? So oftentimes the problem I'm seeing with people is that they don't even have enough energy overall, which starts from the food you eat, to just support their basic day-to-day functions, right? So they're not eating enough carbs, they're not eating enough fat, protein, all that, which is what it literally starts with, that to create enough energy to then do the movement that you want to do in your day-to-day activities. So if you're not even eating enough, that's where you need to look at, right? But then apart from that, what you actually eat turns into energy. But then if you're only ever using like glucose, for example, and you're very reliant on that, you're not going to be what's called metabolically flexible. So you're not going to be able to tap into your fat stores when you should be doing that, which is when you're pretty much at rest. You should be burning fat all the time. And you're always going to be running on glucose, right? So basically, metabolic flexibility refers to that ability of your mitochondria to use fat and glucose as energy stores whenever your body needs them. So it's going in and out of those different, the fat when you need it, when you're in that lower intensity or just day to day, and glucose when you need it, which is when, oftentimes with higher intensity, your brain uses a lot of glucose. So it should be able to use both energy sources whenever it needs to. Your body should be flexible enough to do that, right? But if you have poorly functioning mitochondria, which I actually read is about, I think, 75% of the population, which is like huge, that actually results in metabolic inflexibility, which means you're unable to use fats instead of glucose just to fuel your day to day, right? So you get literally stuck in this state where you can't use the fat properly because you're always in this sort of sympathetic state. You're always burning your glucose, right? And it can't switch in and out easily. So that's what we call like metabolic inflexibility, right? So if you've got poorly functioning mitochondria, which is pretty much what like a huge percent of the population has, this is also connected to the things that you were talking about, like insulin sensitivity, diabetes and all that, then you're just going to struggle. So the second, you start to add in any extra stress to your body, you're going to freak out, freeze, go into that freeze state. If you go and try and do like a workout, for example, a training session, a weights training session, you're going to become very sympathetic and you're not going to be able to get back into that parasympathetic state, that flexible metabolic state where your body's like, okay, now we're not using the glucose directly anymore. So we can use, oxygen again, we're aerobic again, because you're supposed to be aerobic, like 90% of your life. And you're supposed to then save the anaerobic for times when you really, really need it. But a lot of people just aren't flexible. So they're either stuck in that very sympathetic state, which I find a lot of times, or they just freeze. So anytime there's any stress added onto the body, if it's like a weight training session, or even like you said, they go for a walk or whatever, their body freezes. It doesn't know how to come in and out. You're supposed to be like, flexible coming in and out of, the different types of energies that you use. So that's kind of a somewhat easy way of explaining it.
Yeah, I think that was really good. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the wellness, I'm saying that in air quotes, practices and fitness crazes put on these quick fix kind of diets and programs that really disrupt this ability to use energy properly. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if you're keto and you're not having carbohydrates, your body uses, so you can say, okay, cool, well, if I take all the carbs away, then my body has to burn fat as fuel or I will die. But it's
often not even doing that. Yeah, exactly. It's often not even doing that. And instead what it's trying to do is convert it to glucose. So, because it needs that glucose as well. So instead of actually they think they're going to go and turn into these major fat burners, which, can I add as well, a little bit of a disclaimer here. When we're talking about burning fats, we're not talking about fat loss, because I feel like everyone's ears are going to perk up and they're going to be like, so I should be more of a fat burner, but it doesn't equal fat loss. So in order to get fat loss, you need to be in a state of energy deficiency, whether it's carbs or whether it's fat, whatever the case may be. There has to be that deficiency there, but that's a totally different story. But if we're talking about whether our bodies are using the fat or using the carbs for energy, that doesn't mean fat loss. And it doesn't mean if you're using carbs, you're not losing fat. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there as well, because a lot of people just automatically assume when you're using fat for energy, you're burning fat off your body, but you're not, unless you're in that deficit, right? So it's basically just what your body's using as its most easily accessible fuel. So it doesn't have to do these friggin' somersaults to get fuel, right? So if you're there keto and you're eating everything low fat and you have zero carbs in your body, you're going to be having to create that glucose from somewhere, because your body needs that. Like even your brain, as I said, needs so much glucose, right? So it's going to then have to turn the protein that you eat, the muscles on your body and the fat and all that. It's going to try and like somehow make that into glucose. So I think, like you're saying, they go and they do these crazy diets, and instead of it being like giving them this awesome life and the results they want, they end up with even more issues. And then they end up with even further metabolic inflexibility.
100%. And I think that's why there's a lot of people that are overweight as well, like seriously overweight from these kind of things. And we'll come back to that as well. But it's also right about, so our fuel, so what we need is glucose and oxygen, and that gets converted into carbon dioxide and water and energy. And so if we don't get this equation of oxygen and glucose right, we're never going to make energy. Yeah. So this is like, to me, the most basic scientific equation.
It's like at the very top of
of the whole thing. And so this is how we make cells, right? So we're all born as like a cell that got split into more and more and more cells. And so this is what anti-aging is. This is what metabolism is. And so the more we can create more cells, the more metabolic we'll be, the younger we will be. So the
more mitochondria, the more healthy mitochondria you have, basically the more youthful you're going to be. As you like, it's like a life force, basically.
Yeah, 100%. So that comes with building muscle as well as eating the right foods, So that kind of like cancels out all of the fasting stuff, all of those 100%. Dietary crazes. Like it's amazing to me that people can look at this as a scientific equation and not think that maybe I shouldn't fast.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Yeah, exactly.
So I guess so if we're talking about glucose, I think it's really important to talk about the Krebs cycle here. So another basics of nutrition and exercise physiology is the Krebs cycle. So can you just explain that a little bit for people? Like it's super simple.
Super basic. So I think there's there's 4 different pathways with to create energy. You start with the glycolysis, and then it's that link reaction, which is next, and that goes into the Krebs cycle. And then after that, you're creating whether or not it's the carbon dioxide, water, all those kind of things. Those are your waste products, right? So if you're actually creating that, it comes from an aerobic system. So that's where when you're day-to-day life, when you're doing just low intensity zone 1, zone 2, that goes through that cycle, right? And if you're relying too much on anaerobic type exercise, anaerobic training, you're not going to be creating that. You're going to be creating lactic acid and even nitrate and other waste products. So you're not going to be enhancing, your mitochondria, building new cells, all that kind of stuff. Instead, it's a completely opposite way of training. And most people tend to just go straight. So they'll do their strength training, and they'll, maybe do HIIT classes or fake HIIT classes or whatever the case may be. And they'll just skip that whole aspect of the cycle. So they're going to be going super anaerobic all the time. And that's extremely stressful on the body because of those waste products that it produces and you're not actually creating, new mitochondria. You're not creating more oxygen to circulate around your body, which then creates new mitochondria. And that's kind of that part where you want to be spending, I would say, probably 80 to 90% of your time, even your training time, in that sort of side of things. And you want to stay away from that anaerobic, stressful lactic acid, nitrate cycle. So it's basically like the pathways that the energy goes, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can go two ways basically when you're training. So I think a lot of people tend to do the anaerobic respiration, which is, it's basically like you can basically use anaerobic, but it doesn't require oxygen. So it's a super inefficient, I guess it's really inefficient compared to aerobic, as it has that. So it has I can't get into all of it unless I have like my studies here, but it has an energy production of, I think, two molecules of ATP.
Mm-hmm.
And it only lasts for like, maybe 1 to 3 minutes max. So there's going to be no tissue oxygen available, and you'll see that net energy production from anaerobic be like a lot less than if you use like, oxygen aerobic. I would say it's probably a lot more, people that are into like longevity and that as well. They don't realize, but they go and like smash themselves with HIIT. They smash themselves with anaerobic based training, and it's actually like aging all of that stuff. So there's that whole side of it as well. Yeah. I don't know. Was that kind of your question? Did I explain it right?
No. That was really good. And this is the thing, right? Like, and that's why people are getting things like odema, right? Because you're not able to utilize the carbon dioxide to push oxygen into the cell, and so you get all puffy and like water retention and all that kind of stuff. So you're not getting rid of your waste product properly and utilizing it. And you do need a certain amount of carbon dioxide, right? Like I have plenty of clients who have just way too much oxygen saturation in their blood because they're just wasting.
But that's because they don't know how to use it. Their bodies don't know how to use it properly. And that's where I think that aerobic base comes in really handy, because it basically teaches you how to better utilize the oxygen. And it makes that process of, the carbon dioxide waste so much smoother. Whereas if they don't know how to use it properly, then it just, like you said, they have such a big buildup of that and they don't know how to get rid of it. It just gets messed up, the whole cycle.
So let's talk about food and how we manipulate this. I don't want to say manipulate because it's not the right word, but I feel like people who are metabolically inflexible, the process of pro-metabolic is really manipulating food and macros and food timing to improve this state of cellular respiration. I think that's a big thing. We could do a whole nother podcast on that, because I think people go, I take the list of metabolic foods and I just eat what I like on the metabolic food list and I will get better. And this is why people are having this experience, because they're not understanding there's an application. So can you talk about how the glycogen part and the oxygen part is influenced by food?
Yeah, for sure.
Macros.
So I think a lot of people also, like you said, they don't combine foods properly. So there tends to be like a lot of high fat and a lot of high carbs together in like one meal. Whereas your body is generally preferring to use a little bit more of one type of fuel source at one time and then another type of fuel source at another time. And I think you can actually help your body become more metabolically flexible if you usually either prioritize a little bit more carbs in one meal and a little bit less fat, or if you're going to have a little bit more fat, then a little bit less carbs. Obviously nothing extreme, because you do need all three macronutrients. But if you're going really, really high on both all the time, that ends up confusing your body as well. And your, metabolic flexibility, and that starts to suffer a little bit. So I think what I would recommend doing is thinking about when you're pairing your different foods. So for example, if you're not training and you're just getting up in the morning and having breakfast, you could have extra fat in that meal, because, you do use fat to fuel your day-to-day life. It also, when you have muscles at rest, fat is what fuels that too. And then if you're training, I would recommend 100% adding in those, glycogen, carbohydrate rich foods to bump up the glycogen, because you want the glycogen to bump up in the liver and in your muscles before training. And then your body can really utilize that properly for training. It's the perfect fuel for, weight training, high intensity type work. And then again, I would say personally, like I would say probably have some carbs before bed, but don't overdo it when you're having like a massive amount of carbs and a massive amount of fats and you're just going to sleep, because your body has to do something with that fuel. So it's more about, you've got this set amount of food that you have to eat over the course of the day, your calories, your maintenance, or whatever you're eating. But how are you actually dividing that? And are you helping your body give it the fuel at the right times when it can use it the best, when it can become so efficient with that fuel and use it to support what you're doing rather than just sitting there, or rather than your body using the fat so then it stores the carbs as fat. So yeah, like it's about timing, I guess. Food pre and post workout, timing as well your first meal of the day. A lot of people tend to like a bit more fat in that meal, timing your last meal of the day. Just it's almost like you're not tricking your body, but you're helping guide your body with the fuel sources based on what you're doing, as opposed to just going ham every single meal and then sitting down at a desk all day. Like, what on earth is the body going to do with all that fuel you just ate? It's nothing. It's just going to store it, right? So
sorry, and it's really individual for everybody, right? Because everybody goes, oh, I saw so-and-so on Instagram and she eats this, and so I'm just going to eat that.
Yeah, it's so individual. Like some people, I think, even I was talking to Jessica Ash about this, and she was saying that she notices some people are better with like carbs and they're more of carb burners naturally, and then other people are more like fat burners naturally, of course, again, with a balance here, because we do need both regardless. But it's not just thinking that there's a one size fits all and that you're just going to be able to eat what so-and-so eats and get the exact same results. So I agree with that too.
And I think as well, it depends on what stage of your healing journey you're in. So you can't just go, and I think this is a huge problem with exercise intolerance. And again, in air quotes, I hate that term, but that's what we're talking
It's like a sad term now, don't you think? A little bit of a sad term.
It's people going, oh, well, I did keto and then I heard that I need to incorporate carbs into my life. So now I'm just going to eat carbs.
Yeah. And it's like straight out 100%.
Yeah, I was plant-based and now I need to eat meat. So I'm just going to eat meat. And can you explain a little bit about how we need to like get a bit of a base and progress in a certain way? And
yeah. I think with that as well, people just go too crazy too soon. And it's like you wouldn't do anything you wouldn't go from 1 to 100 with anything. Like, you're not going to run a marathon tomorrow if you haven't trained for it. So it's very similar with food. I think that, you need to get your body always just wants to feel safe, and it always just wants that homeostasis. So it just wants to know what's going on. And people will go and they'll just go from doing, running on stress hormones, barely any calories, barely any carbs, and then they'll throw all the stuff at the body. And like you can imagine, the brain and the body is like, what is going on? So I think like with anything, I'm such a proponent of take it slow. And I even like to say in general, have a plan, like have a set 6-week plan or an 8-week plan. Like this is what I do with my clients. Even like if we're going to reverse diet, it's a plan. It's like, okay, you're going to up your carbs by this much. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to check and see everything and that it's going in the right direction. And then we'll add more carbs. We're not just going to go, oh, I found this new way of eating, so I'm going to smash 6 cups of orange juice every single day when I've had like no sugar in my diet. So I think that's really just a simple concept of how can you go from 0 to 100 in anything without something going wrong in that place, Something's going to, go ahead.
It's also so like people not understanding different like nutrient density as well, like, and not all food is created equal. So we get quite a lot of people in the pro-metabolic community who are having 6 cups of orange juice a day, or like I've had so many clients who've come to me who are just having this liquid diet of dairy and orange juice, all these smoothies with collagen and bits of cheese here and there. And so they're having like 3,000 calories of liquid and they're still hungry. Yeah. And so do you want to touch on that a little bit too? Like not all calories are equal.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's actually a really big key as well, is that density side of things. And I actually think that if you can sort of have your body, not train your body, but help your body learn how to have a bigger meal, use that fuel that you ate and not just go and have to eat again in 1 or 2 hours, you're going to be so much better off than having like little meals often, like every 2 hours, and never fully like digesting that last meal. So not even utilizing that fuel yet, and then adding to it again and adding to it again. Like, again, it's like adding to something that's still there and you haven't even used it yet. So I think that concept of density, when you have, rather than just having a sugar, like, let's say a piece of fruit or some gummies, for example, as your carb source, you want to actually add something that's dense as well, like a, sweet potato or a potato or some rice or some oats or something. Like, add that with the other one, and then your body can actually learn how to utilize all those types of fuel as well. Because, if you just have pure fructose, well, your body's going to only get used to using fructose. And if, you want to also have some glucose with it, train it to use both of the types of fuel. And I think this is where a lot of times that pro-metabolic approach of just these very set foods and you can't have anything else works against people, because I personally don't want my body to only be able to utilize certain foods. Like, it's almost like going from doing vegan or going from doing carnivore or going from doing low carb to just another kind of fad where you're super limited by what you're choosing because you only want white sugar and fructose and you don't want anything else. You know what I mean? So I think it comes down to, of course, if you have digestive issues, and I know a lot of women have, which I actually think is a problem with energy utilization as well. A lot of women have those blood sugar issues where they have to eat or they can't survive. They like start shaking and stuff, but it's like every 2 hours, every 3 hours. That's an energy issue, because that means your body's not using the energy that you're giving it as fuel. And it's not turning it into like, what do we need? Do we need to fuel this next couple hours with fat? Do we need to fuel the next couple hours with carbs? So it's not doing that properly. So therefore it freaks out. So again, that's an energy issue, and that's a metabolic inflexibility issue. And in order to solve that, it's not always about just still doing that same thing that you're always doing, but it might be even something like as simple as increasing your aerobic base. Because when you're increasing your aerobic base, you're teaching your body how to use that fat that you have there, and it's using that as fuel. So it's actually, they all like join together. It's not, and I also think that sometimes people they're very set in their ways and they think that this is what I need to do. I only need to do my 2 or 3 weight training sessions a week because that's healthy. And I don't need to do any cardio because that's unhealthy. And I shouldn't eat oats because there's oxalates in that. And I shouldn't eat this and I shouldn't eat that. So they have this like super narrow like view of what they should do in life. And it's literally basically like making them more and more inflexible because their body is going to adjust to what it does all the time. So yeah, I think that coming away from that, looking at it as a fad and looking at it as these rules that we have to follow, and actually stepping back and thinking, what is energy? How is energy created? How can my body use that energy best? We want our body to use fat as energy, and we want our body to use glucose as energy. And when your body's using those two energy sources as efficiently and properly as possible, and it's like burning through the glucose and it's burning through the fat when it should, you're going to be able to eat more food. You're going to have a higher metabolism, and you're going to be like a better furnace. You're going to burn more. So, I mean, that's everyone's end goal, but then they have this narrow approach.
Super narrow. And I think it's also.
But then you have the other angle, because I work with more like athletic women and all that, but you have that angle where you actually work with people who have a big problem with that. So then your side of things is probably like, yeah, well, some people literally can't handle more. They can only start with that. So I think it's about when you can add more and when you can handle more. Don't be stuck in your ways. Slowly, like you're a perfect example. I mean, you've started adding some training and some cardio and all that. And like, you're a perfect example, I would say. Well, someone who came from like mold and everything.
Thank you. Well, I think like, I think I want to say here that I get Libby to coach me sometimes, because I think it's really important as a coach to get coaching, because you don't really understand what it's like to be coached if you've never been coached before. And also sometimes I get like paralysis analysis.
Yeah.
I'm like,
we all do.
Libby, should I do a fat loss phase? Should I do a muscle building phase? What should I do? Hang on, why don't I just check in with Libby and let's plan because we all have an ego and we all want so many things. And, so it's really good to have that person who's like, okay, what's realistic for you? what do you want? Because you can't have everything all at the same time. And that's, a big thing that Libby and I are always talking about. You just can't have everything all at the same time. And it's like, you wouldn't just like get your baby straight out of the womb and go throw a ball and expect it to go and walk over and get it. Like, it's a 12-month process before it can even walk. And there's very finite layers of that process. And if they don't get through that process, then later in life, they can have hip issues and foot issues and back issues and, jaw issues. So I think a lot of these people have to remember, and when they're this intolerant to stress, not in exercise, intolerant to stress, is that they're like a baby and they need to go baby and focus on recovery. So a baby needs a lot of sleep and a lot of food. And that's the primary, starting point. So you wouldn't throw your baby out into the wilderness. So I like to have Libby on my team because I can go, okay, I really need to plan this out, because it's a long game as well. And when, we talked about this in our last podcast, that playing the long game is not about, oh my God, this is just going to take forever. It's going, okay, well, these are my goals and these are the set things that I need to do to get towards that goal. And so, we've just had a meeting earlier in the week and we're talking about how I'm going to do something for 8 weeks and then I'm going to have a break and I'm going to do 8 weeks and then we're going to test and measure and, so to see if it's working. And so I think some people have been messaging me on Instagram going, because I've lost so much weight, oh my God, was that Libby's plan that does this? And I'm like, what plan does Libby have? People want you to go, here it is. Yeah, here's the little thing. Just do this for 12 weeks and everything will be better. And if you have a thyroid condition or you've had mold illness like I have, as well as had a baby and all this stuff all at the same time, my clients that work with me who have thyroid conditions, it's 12 months before they get back into strength training.
Yeah.
It is a goal for them, but and this is what people are not understanding about metabolic healing. It's like I have a process for them. So it's take a base. Like, what's your base? So if you've just come from the mold protocol, I'm not going to make any comments on what I think about that, but I didn't do it, by the way. It's restricting carbohydrates because sugar feeds mold, apparently, right? So you have this whole bunch of people who've also been taking like cholesterol-lowering medication and fish oil, high-dose fish oil. So they've completely destroyed their body's ability to use fats properly. And they're eating way too much fat, because as soon as you restrict carbs, you end up eating way too much fat. It's just like law of nature. And then they're like, go to exercise, but you've lost your ability to have a receptivity to insulin, which you need, and glucose. And they often have leptin resistance as well, which is all tied into that, because you didn't eat carbs for such a long time. So you can't just go and train, because you need carbs, you need glycogen to fuel your exercise. So we have to go back to the basics. And this is why I want to talk, about, I'd love for Libby to explain this, building your aerobic base and why it's so important. And a big piece of the mold thing is that people don't breathe properly.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I've heard from a few people who had mold and they were often the ones who had the hardest time with exercise. And like getting that heart rate up and the respiration aspect. So yeah, I didn't even know that about mold. That's really interesting.
Well, there's like an infection that lives in your nose, like a strep infection. And then I don't know what you naturally do, but I know that like if I would smell mold, I would like stop breathing through my nose and mouth breathe, because I couldn't stand the smell of it. So I don't know how many people do little automatic things like that.
Yeah.
But if you're literally living in mold and breathing in this toxin, which is a massive endocrine disruptor, because like you can have a look into Tommy did his PhD on pollution and the endocrine system, and mold was a big factor. So I'm going to have him come on and talk about it. But it gets into your respiratory system, and it really affects your endocrine system, which is your metabolic system.
Hormones and all that, yeah.
So, and then you cut out carbs, because there's this belief that carbs feed, sugar feeds mold, and then you disrupt that system even more. Yeah. And then you're not exercising, you're not breathing, because you're trying not to breathe in the mold in your house, because you become like super hypersensitive to it, and then you just, when you're in that fight or flight stress state, you stop breathing properly.
Yeah, for sure.
But even just with, I think it's really important to talk about breath here and starting with breath, because even just going for my walks in the morning, it's just, we've just had New Year's, right? And everyone's running. It's like after New Year's, all the runners come out for January.
All the pain faces.
Oh, I know. And they're all like running with their mouth open and they're huffing and puffing. And can we please, Libby, talk about
the reason for it?
Yeah. And one of the first things that I assess people with who come and see me personally is like respiration rate, like, and all their breathing mechanics. Let's talk about breath and how important it is.
Yeah. Can I also add one more thing? Because how before I was saying about how the girls who I tend to work with, oftentimes they came from that background of high intensity training. They had an issue. They had to stop all their training and then they're trying to now rebuild it. Something that is interesting that I noticed as well is that they weren't actually feeling really, really good with exercise before. They were just running on stress hormones and they were constantly, like you said, mouth breathing with all their activity levels, and it gave them those endorphin rush, and they felt really, really good from it because it's the stress hormones. And that addiction that you were talking about as well, they're addicted to those stress hormones. They're addicted to being outside of their body. They're addicted to not having to feel anything. They just want to get their mind off their stresses and they just want to go for that high intensity workout. They're the ones who are now basically, I feel like it's a retraining of everything to be able to exercise the right way. And it's almost harder for them than for someone who comes from not doing any exercise to then starting exercise. So for them, it's literally like so much harder to tell them to slow down, to take it easier, to build that base first, because they skipped that whole part. And the only thing their mind sort of connects with exercise is endorphins, stress hormones, like this high of it, so their mind's automatically going to start connecting that to it. So then it's basically retraining it, which a lot of people have to do. And I think that's why it's so hard sometimes. But with like the breathing, for sure, I actually think personally, I would have done so much better as a CrossFit athlete if I knew what I know now. And if I trained myself to develop my aerobic base first, because I don't come from an aerobic background. Like I don't have a sports background that's aerobic based or anything. So therefore I literally had this, I think there's like a name for it. It's like aerobic something deficiency. I don't remember there's an actual name for it, but it's basically when athletes have a deficiency in that entire aerobic base and they just start doing a sport that's very anaerobic, they miss a huge part of even just developing themselves as an athlete. So you can kind of bring that back to just a normal person, right? If you're going to go from not training or, not doing any sort of movement to going straight into a little bit too high intensity for you, your body's not going to develop that aerobic base yet. So you're going to be just mouth breathing. You're going to be going straight into that anaerobic state. And you're going to miss out on that whole big development of the aerobic base, which then actually benefits you in the long term. It helps you become better at whatever it is that you're doing. It helps you become a better lifter. It helps you become better at utilizing energy and all that. So I think just taking it back, even just starting with breath, is so important. And I would even say if you can't stop breathing through your mouth, you can put like a piece of tape over your mouth like we do when you're sleeping, if you are a mouth breather during your sleep. And just get on like a bike. It might be a bit weird to do that in the gym, but do something if you can do it when no one's around, or if you feel, embarrassed by it. Put tape over your mouth, and you literally are stopping yourself from breathing through your mouth, because it's just training your brain. It's training your body to stop breathing through your mouth. I would even start with that and just do some very low intensity. So whether it's walking or whether you're jumping on an exercise bike and just doing it super slowly and just, nose breathing, that would just be your first place to start, before you even worry about like breathing drills, which you can do later, or zone 2 work, which is like, the next one up from walking. Before you worry about that, I would just get the breathing right first. And then training your brain to breathe like that, training yourself to breathe through your nose, it's also going to benefit you throughout the day, just in your day to day. Because so many people just walk around mouth breathing. They don't nose breathe. They do shallow mouth breathes. And you can see it when you're talking to people. You can see it when someone's like walking next to you outside, like you said, you can just see that they're mouth breathing and they don't take deep breaths at all. So I would say that's the very first step.
100%. And I think a lot of these women that you're talking about, because I do have some of these clients too, who this high exercise intensity person, and then they've had some kind of thyroid or adrenal burnout and come and see me. And when I'm working with them physically and having to help them breathe again, I have to like do a whole lot of tissue work on them to release all those muscles. And a lot of them like your diaphragm, and if you think of it in terms of chakras and stuff, it's all to do with your personal power and stuff like that in that chakral area, whether you believe in that or not. But like, so when you get into someone's diaphragm, I can't tell you how many women have just burst into tears like as soon as I've released their diaphragm, because it's like now you have to come back into your body, which you were using exercise and dieting and all these stress hormones to get out of. Mm-hmm. And now you have to come back in and start retraining. So, and unfortunately, like a lot of our fitness crazes encourage the tightening of all those muscles, like doing heaps and heaps of crunches and not balancing it out with other core work and stability work, or doing that, just not breathing properly and crunching, all of that stuff. And, poor shoulder stability, doing heaps of shoulder training and, then getting all these traps, but also ergonomics and phone use. Like most people don't realize, like when you sit on your computer and stick your head forward, like you're going to open your mouth more because you compress your airway and then you have to open your mouth to get more air in. So just our ergonomics affect our way that we breathe.
Also, when you walk, I'm so guilty of this, but walking with your phone because you're leaning forward. So that, again, that just makes you it makes it harder to nose breathe. So I think that's a huge one. And if you look at the posture of someone who's walking with their phone, it's completely different than the posture of someone who's not walking with their phone. So 100%. Yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to multitask, but I would say, if you can have some time where you're just walking and focusing on your breath, leave your phone at home or put it, turn it off and put it in your pocket or whatever you need to do. But yeah.
And I think a really good reminder for people is like when I first started doing it's about reminding yourself that I'm teaching myself to be able to recover from stress, because most people are like, oh, I'm just walking, it's not doing anything, But you're teaching yourself to get into that zone, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what do you tell clients to motivate?
Yeah. So I have a lot of clients who just hate it. They just hate having to be slow, and they hate having to do anything that isn't, like I had this girl tell me that she's got 2 sons and she's like, I just need that outlet. I need it. Like it's like ingrained in them. Like, and I get it. They have a stressful life, but you need to think about it, like Layla said, as the entire recovery side of it as well. You're not just saying go walk to de-stress. You're literally saying go walk and do these things to help your body recover from the training that you did, to give you more muscle, to help you it puts you in that anabolic state. That parasympathetic state correlates with anabolic processes in your body. So anabolic means, growth, new muscle, everything good comes from that parasympathetic state. And if you have a lot of issues and a lot of problems and a lot of digestive problems, you're very likely, I can almost say 100%, spending too much time in the sympathetic state, because that's just where everything just closes off and it's stress. And you need that as well in the right doses and for the right things. But, I think that just I try to teach them about those 3 buckets. There's like your internal processes energy bucket, and then your output energy bucket. And then there's that recovery bucket of energy that needs to stay full. And when you're doing these things, it's almost like you're adding to that piggy bank, you're adding to that recovery bucket. So it's not just about it's so many people have this problem. Like they just don't want to do it. They don't want to rest. They don't want to take time to just walk. It's a waste of time. And, it's like, why should I just go and spend an hour walking when I can't even motivate myself to go train enough? When the dishes are dirty, there's clothes everywhere in the house. Like, well, I'm just using somebody to go walk and do nothing. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Because it's going to make you a better person. It's going to make you a better mother. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to make you, happier, everything, because that's what recovery does. And if you're always under recovered and you always have a recovery debt, like that doesn't feel good.
I think it's really about as well, like with my clients, I'm like, you're not allowed to do any exercise until you can hit your step target. I'm not letting you, because you're just going to come back to me and go, oh, I'm still, having all these stress responses from exercise. And so some of my clients actually say for a whole year, you're not allowed to do any kind of strength training, nothing. And I want to see you hit those steps every single day. You have to prove it to me, like in your app, send me screenshots of your app that you've done all these steps and look at your HRV and stuff like that. And people start out and they're like the same as you, they hate it. And I'm like, you're not allowed to look at your phone. You're not allowed to text people. You're not allowed to call people, because then you're talking, you're not nose breathing. Mm-hmm. And I think what it is, people have used exercise and fitness things to get out of their body so much they fucking hate being in their body. It's a really awful, uncomfortable place. And so to go for a walk, they're like, well, what am I going to do? I'm like, look at the trees.
Do you find that as well? Like they try to turn everything into a stressful task.
Yeah.
Like I find that with so many people as well. And it's almost like, okay, so I'm counting, like they'll message me. So I couldn't do the 8 breath holds and then I couldn't do, and then this, and I'm like, you know what? That doesn't sound like you were really relaxing and letting yourself just be as well. And that's it, that you can't force relaxation. You can't force breath work. You can't, because that defeats the whole purpose. And I'm like, do you ever just look at like the flowers and the colors and, you know, like the sky and the crazy shapes of the clouds? And they're like, nah, like there's literally, it's tunnel vision. It's what am I doing? How can I tick this off my to-do list? Yeah. And there's no like creativity. There's no, and that's all part of that. You know, you could even connect it to the feminine side versus the masculine side. Mm-hmm. That's all part of the parasympathetic, the feminine, the, you know, whatever you want to call it, that your body has a need for that. It needs to be able to do that. And if you can't do that, if you can't stand still, look at the sky and appreciate the clouds, or find something that's interesting you, something that's capturing your attention about nature, right? Then you have bigger problems than, you know, not training or not doing your macros or not like, so that's why I agree with you. Like that's needs to be the beginning. That needs to be the start. But then as much as I like to systemize things, at the same time, it's like, do we then go and make de-stressing a system as well? Do we then go make, you know what I mean? So there's that really, and I find this really, really challenging as a coach, this aspect of this type A woman who just can't relax, literally can't relax. Like at any time, at any state, they wake up and they're already sympathetic in the morning and they really, really struggle. And it's probably not their fault entirely, because it's also just the way things are these days, with fast-paced life, and they're, you know, they knock 3-4 kids out one after another, and it's just, but you know, that's where health starts. Like, why are you even thinking about anything else? Like, why are you even thinking about, you know, your monthly cycle if you can't even get your stress in order? Like, you can't even allow yourself those moments every single day where you're just in the moment. And you're just literally focused on in the moment, what's in front of you, what's around you, what does everything smell like? How does my body feel right now? And, you know, I guess there's probably different cues that work for different people. I mean, I find music actually helps me. Just certain types of music. So I won't even have any words in it. I'll just put on like, you know, whatever it's called, binary beats, or even just some sort of relaxation, and go for a walk. And man, it relaxes me so much. Like, I know. I think everyone's... Yeah, exactly. I think everyone's different, but that's not something that you want to necessarily post about online. It's not about, oh, guys, I'm relaxing. No, exactly. It's not. And it should be something that you know yourself in your body when you're in that state, because you can feel that switch. You can really feel that switch. You can actually breathe deeply without thinking about it. So
100%. Yeah. I think, it's, I almost like, it's my special time. My little walks every day. I got to a point where I was like, I don't even want to take my phone, because I just want to be disconnected from everything. It's my special time. Like, you know, and then I started walking. I put my headphones in and I'd walk for an hour and come back and go, I didn't even turn any music on.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just like my headphones so no one will talk to me.
So no one disturbs you. I know. It's like your sacred time almost. It should be, I think. I think every woman particularly, I mean men of course too, but I work with women, so I think they need more of those sacred times, and not even so much when it's, like I said, ticking it off a checklist, because I think that's also a problem. If you're just doing it to go through the motions and tick it off a checklist, then you might not fully be actually getting into that state. And it's got to come from within.
100%. And it's just small little bits at a time, you know, like do after every meal, do 10 minutes, you know, after you drop the kids off at school, just drive somewhere where you have to walk, or walk a really long way home from school, or, you know, just make it that, okay, cool, they're gone, now it's my time. Like for me, it has to be put in the timetable still, because it's like
100%.
I'm busy. I'm a mum running a business, and I have to fit it all in. So it's, but it's a non-negotiable. And I agree with you. I have clients kind of say, like downloaded Libby's recovery thing, and I'm doing the box breathing, and I can only go for a block. And I'm like, how about we just start with just nose breathing?
Yeah.
No,
exactly.
and it's that thing, is like I've got to.
It's always has to be something. Yeah. Yeah. And you even see it like with like, for example, the box breathing. It's like they want to do the box breathing or they want to do the holds and that because it's harder. So if it's always like, is this harder? Is this is going to be better? This is harder. It's like, it's not supposed to be hard. If you're feeling it really, really hard, you're probably not doing it right. Like that's supposed to be, you're supposed to think about it and focus on it, but it's not supposed to be hard. So I think if you should get what you're doing and that should become natural and easy for you before you move to the next step.
I think some of my like really stressed people who are afraid of all this stress are actually easier sometimes because we can just do it really small because they go, oh no, I tried the breathing, I tried to hold my breath and it will stress me out, it scared me. I'm like, okay, cool, let's just keep nose breathing then and keep walking.
Exactly.
So they're sometimes easier because it's like just do it as easy as possible. So then building up cardio, because I think this is good. Like I've really noticed, so I think from personal experience coming from exercise and because sometimes people message me and they're like, oh, it's good to see someone, a fit person. It's true. Like a lot of people who are in fitness or influencers or whatever have been fit their whole life and people feel like they can't relate to me because they've never been through this experience. So I like to talk about it. But what I noticed when I doing mine, because I had to start from all over, because literally after the mold infection, I couldn't breathe. Like I'd be walking up the street and I couldn't breathe. So I started from way, 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 way the bottom. But what I've noticed is I can hold my breath, close my mouth. And also I've had like major reconstruction of my jaw and everything to improve my airway. So I was unable to breathe through my nose most of my life. So over time, just consistently walking every day, I can walk further and further and further. So I'm obviously walking faster or finish my set route quicker and the same amount of steps quicker. So it actually takes less and less time. So you become more and more efficient at it. So it's easy to go from 5,000 steps to 10,000 steps to 15,000 steps because you get better at it. And then recently I started adding in zone 2 cardio. Would you explain the zone 2 cardio? And I still would you say, like a lot of people, you would say just do the zone 1 and then the zone 2 before you even get back into training sometimes?
Yeah. So, and also zone 1 is not necessarily a thing. Like people are always like, what do I do to do zone 2? But I'm like, it's not a thing. It's a heart rate. So for some people walking, because they haven't really done much of it, is going to be quite zone 2 of an activity. So their heart rate's going to get above. So if, let's say their zone 2 heart rate is 125 to 140, right? They're going to get into that range just from walking. So I would say keep doing that until the walking becomes a zone 1. And then you can think about adding other stuff. And then you can think about adding, maybe like jumping on a bike and doing actual program zone 2 work. But if you're walking and you're just going into zone 2, even I know many people who go into zone 3 just from walking. So like they're going into that stressed where the body becomes, it's sort of that in between. I posted it today on the Instagram. It's that in between place where it's like aerobic threshold going into anaerobic. So their heart rate's like, you'll see like 160, 165 just from walking. And that's obviously means that they need to do a lot more of just the aerobic stuff. So they need to slow things down. They need to just do a very slow walk with just breath work, just breathing through the nose, taking deep breaths, because every time you exhale long and slow, that slows the heart rate down. So if you're finding that you're just walking and your heart rate's going to 140, 150, which, as I said, is actually really common, that takes us back to what we were talking about initially, where the body is not utilizing the fuel properly because they're probably eating still as much as they normally would. But if you're going straight into anaerobic just from walking, what's happening to all the food you're eating? What's happening to the fat? You should be going through different cycles of your first burning fat, and then your body starts to burn more carbs as you get quicker and faster. So I would say that probably you don't even need to worry about going into like specific, like jump on a bike or whatever, unless you track your heart rate and you're walking and for a fact that you're in that, 90 to 125 or whatever it is when you're walking that pace. That's like zone 1. So yeah, I think that getting that done first, making sure that you can easily do a good 60-minute walk, staying in zone 1 would be the priority. That's a really, really good start. Like if you've gone from getting your heart rate up to like 155, 160, and it's coming, and now you can walk, like you said, faster and better, and you can stay in that zone. that's a huge improvement. That basically means you're using a lot more, aerobic energy, and you're creating more oxygen in your body and all that as well. So then you can bump that up. So sometimes, like, if you then want to go into zone 2, you're going to have to do something to increase the intensity. You could walk faster. You could do a brisk walk. You could add a weight vest. You could walk in an incline. You could jump on a bike and just, I find the bike's the best for a few different reasons. It's very easy for me to stabilize my heart rate, to gradually do it, as opposed to walking or, jogging or something where you might have an incline and then your heart rate jumps. And so when you're doing that, sometimes it tends to be all over the place. But it's something like a bike, an exercise bike, you can just keep it very steady. And then you would want to obviously start with zone 2, which is, I can't do specific heart rates because it just depends on the person and what your maximum heart rate is. But I've put some formulas on my Instagram and you can look at those. But let's say your zone 2 heart rate is 125 to 140. You want to try and stay in that. So you can use a heart rate strap, like a Polar, and it will attach to your phone or a watch or whatever. And you just want to make sure that you're staying in that zone. Because what most people tend to do is they're like, okay, so I'm walking and then I'm working my higher zones, and then I'm working like zone 3, zone 4. But they always skip that zone 2. And that was a mistake I made as a CrossFitter as well. And it affected, my recovery and my ability to progress as a CrossFitter in the sport as well. But yeah, that would be your next step, would be that zone 2. And you don't need, so the thing is, I also have a little bit of a beef with people who say, well, the reason why you don't want to do cardio is because your body's going to become, better at that cardio, and it's going to become more efficient, and you don't want your body to be more efficient. But that's just silly to me, because of course, whatever you do, whether it's weights, whether it's cardio, whatever it is, you want your body to become very efficient at that thing so that you can then increase, right? So if you're doing weights, like, why does no one say, well, you don't want to add weights, you don't want to do weights and progress because your body's going to become efficient at that, then you're going to have to add more. Well, that's like the whole point. That's the whole entire point. The same with cardio. If you're telling me that it's not healthy to do cardio, but it's healthy to walk from your front door to your mailbox and have your heart rate go to 160, I'm going to say no. I'm going to challenge you on that and say that's like definitely not healthy, just because it's inefficient, because your heart rate spikes right away. So I would say that what you want to do is get zone 2 going, do like 2 sessions a week, and then just maintain. You don't need to keep, we're not talking about, like, obviously, if you then go and become extreme with your aerobic fitness as well, it's costing more energy. It's taking more away from, what you could do with strength training and that. So the goal is not to be an endurance athlete. It's to just get, a very, very well working aerobic base, and then just maintain that. And that's going to benefit you in so many ways. That's going to benefit you with your strength training. I've had so many people tell me, like, I can finally actually do my strength training one day after the next, with my rest days in between, and recover. And I can rest for my 2 minutes and I can recover and go back to the bar and do my next set. And there's none of this crazy stuff. Like, I had a power lifter tell me that I was working with, and she was just doing powerlifting. She didn't do any aerobic training, any cardio, any steps, nothing. And she was really strong. But she's like, I started knowing that this was benefiting me because I would put my knee sleeves on and I would rack the bar and unrack the bar without being out of breath. Like, she's completely out of breath before, just from doing that. Like, how is that healthy, right? So I think it comes back to that balance, and that zone 2 is what I call the forgotten zone, particularly with this high intensity era of fitness where everyone's all about high intensity. That's definitely the forgotten zone, and it's the healthy zone because it doesn't put stress on your body like zone 3, 4, and 5 starts to do. And then that zone 3, which is like that no man's land, or that metabolic wasteland, as I call it, it's not bad. Like, I wouldn't say any zones are bad, and you do need to train that if you're an athlete as well. But that zone, you're not getting more aerobic benefits, more mitochondria benefits, more of those benefits than you are in zone 2, but you are getting more stress. So it's a poor trade-off, right? And then when you go to zone 4 and zone 5, that's a lot more anaerobic. And that's where you start adding speed work and power work, which personally I actually think is really important if you have the bases covered. Like power, speed, particularly as you get older. So, I think it's over the age of 40, you lose so much speed and you lose so much more power than strength even. So I would be including definitely a little bit of HIIT if you're in a good place, proper HIITs. If you've got your aerobic base covered, you're strong, you've lifted weights, you're eating plenty, you're feeling good, I would do proper zone 4 and zone 5 training maybe once a week if you want to be that well-rounded person, But that should come later. As you said, you should always build the foundations. But what most people do, and this is even athletes, this is even like me as a CrossFitter, this is even runners, they go all zone 3 because it's that really good endorphin feeling place and you can prolong it. So I could go do a 20-minute AMRAP, which is like as many rounds as possible with CrossFit lingo, and I could push in that zone the entire time, right? But it's stressful on your body, so you have to recover. It costs more recovery, but I could push in that zone, and then you'd also feel sweaty and you'd collapse on the floor at the end and you'd feel good and you get those endorphins. So everyone automatically just ends up, if you look at heart rates and stuff of people, it always ends up in that zone, whatever they're doing, right? So that's where I think it takes some actual discipline to stay in the lower zone for a lot of people.
Totally. And it's key thing is, I think in the zone 2, you still want to be nose breathing, right?
Yeah. So that's I'd say probably you should be able to say a 12 to 15 word sentence without having to stop and take a breath. That's like the best test, because of course you're going to be breathing heavier a little bit than zone 1. But if you're having a conversation, like zone 1, you shouldn't even have to think about breathing. Zone 1, you should be able to just walk and talk with a friend, right? Zone 2, you should be able to say like a 12 to 15 word sentence without having to take a breath. As you're going into zone 3, you can still talk. You can be like, hey, can you pass me that water? Yeah. Like that's how you start to go with zone 3 type thing. So you're unable to kind of put sentences together. So if that's what you're finding, it's a good way to just see it if you don't have a heart rate monitor, is to test your sentences and how, if you can say a continuous sentence without taking a breath.
I think it's interesting, right? Because everyone's automatic thing is, if I can't talk or if I can't just walk out of my house and run to the bus because I'm running late, then I have to go and run more. Where it's actually, you need to work on this aerobic base.
The base, yeah.
Yeah. Which is so interesting, right? So interesting. And I'm, seeing this in various things. So yeah, I think
it's even important for inflammation in the body, which is a side note as well, because the anaerobic sort of those, when you're starting to burn produce a little bit more lactic acid and those waste products, that's the very kind of anaerobic type state, is a crossover. So it's not fully anaerobic, but that crossover in that zone 3 and 4, that's very inflammatory, that state. So you create a lot of inflammation in the body. And I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of people are just very inflammatory and they're very sympathetic as it is. You can kind of see it with some of the symptoms they tell you about. It's just, inflammation is obviously just a catch-all for everything. But if you have high inflammation levels in your body, that's a sign that you don't want to be doing the inflammatory type training, which is, the zone 3, the one that everyone thinks they should be doing, that high intensity, the F45, all of that. You should be working on lowering the inflammation by doing more zone 2 work. And that's where you actually, you're starting to become less inflammatory overall. And you can also recover from inflammation so much better. So it's, immune system benefits. It's got longevity benefits. I was reading a bunch of studies the other day, which they're all like talking about lifespan and, having aerobic fitness. And they were saying that it actually comes down to the inflammation side of it. So because you are less inflammatory, that's why you have more longevity. And I know there's all these different people that talk about like how to make your body less inflammatory, but it's such a simple thing to do, is just to develop an aerobic base, because then your body is trained to get into that parasympathetic state, which is not inflammatory. So you're getting into that recovery state really easily all the time. And like my life goal is to stay in that recovery state as much as possible when I'm not training. So if I'm not lifting weights, I want to be able to be, and of course, some people don't have that, ability to do that when they have crazy kids and their babies waking up all night. But I think if we can we can train our body to get into that recovery state, that aerobic state as quickly as possible and stay there as long as possible. That's a huge aspect of longevity as well.
Yeah. And I think like everyone was talking about mums who have babies, and like the best thing you can do is just put that baby in a pram and just walk, close your mouth and just breathe through your nose. Like not to follow all these programs about getting your baby body back and all this sort of stuff. Just walk and push your pram.
Breathe. Yeah, 100%.
And look at your baby, like have them facing you and connect with them and stuff, and take them out in nature. I think we think it has to be so hardcore all the time. But I see this a lot with people in the mole group, because they're always talking about, and I hope a lot of them listen to this podcast, but they're always talking about how they started doing, no, I've got to improve my mitochondria, so I've got to do weight training. So when is it appropriate, Libby, to introduce weight training, and why isn't it appropriate, like, straight off the bat?
I would always say to build an aerobic base first, mainly because if you're going from someone who's doing nothing to just going straight into weight training, that's going to be a very anaerobic activity for you. And your body's not going to have any ability to recover in between sets, in between sessions. So it's not, so in order, like your whole entire results is dependent on your ability to recover. So recovery means in between the sets that you're doing, in between the sessions that you're doing, like the day to, like, say you want to do 2 sessions a week, right? So like, what's your whole goal of doing weights? It's to build muscle. But if you can't recover, you can't build muscle. You can't keep doing the weight training sessions. You can't. Another thing that I noticed is they can't add progressive overload. They're like, it's too much for me, my body. I can't do it. So, you've got to earn your right to be able to do progressive overload. You've got to build your body and build your base first to be able to do those things. You can't just go from like having zero base to jumping in straight into a weightlifting or anaerobic activity. And a really good test you can do is, if you're wearing a heart rate monitor, in between your sets, just look and see how quickly your heart rate comes back down. It shouldn't come down to complete resting heart rate, but it should come pretty close. Like, it should be dropping below 100 beats per minute. If let's say your resting heart rate 70, it should be coming back to like 100 or lower. It shouldn't be staying at 140, 130, 120 while you're resting. So that's a really good sign of that flexibility and that ability to recover enough, because what happens is the aerobic system replenishes the anaerobic system. So you're doing this high, crazy anaerobic set of squats, for example, and then if you're not able to replenish that energy, you're not going to have enough for the next set. You're not going to be able to push as hard. So like, the whole point of weight training is to be able to push really, really hard, add progressive overload, break down those muscles, break down that muscle tissue, then have it rebuild, right? But if there's a missing piece there because you can't do that, it's kind of like, well, you're wasting your time. So I would 100% focus on building that aerobic base first. You can kind of do certain things, like you can do body weight stuff and you can start learning the skill of lifting in that. But when I'm talking about lifting with progressive overload, intentional lifting, I would definitely build that base first.
So, because I think the thing as well is, like, if you're in a place where you've come from low carb and then all of a sudden you eat carbs, and how does that affect that when you start weight training? So and especially in this
your body doesn't
movement.
It wouldn't know how to use energy yet properly, so it wouldn't know how to use the glucose that you're eating. So that's going to affect you in terms of like your energy levels, even when you're trying to lift and that. So even just adding in that aerobic base training, it's helping your body use glucose better. It's helping your body use fats better. It's helping all of that. So it's like very much a starting point. Whereas when you go and start doing weights right away, you have to know how to use that glucose. That needs to shuttle straight into your muscles and turn into, muscle glycogen. And that's obviously a process. And if your body doesn't know how to do that, what are you going to be burning? Probably muscle tissue. It doesn't use it properly. So teaching your body, like the aerobic system, that's why it's so awesome, because it teaches your body as well how to use the fuel that you're giving it. It's literally like, we need fuel right now. So, what are we going to use? Can we use the fat that we have stored here? Can we use some, liver glycogen? Can we use a bit of muscle glycogen? Like, it just helps your body use it all. It's super healthy, as opposed to going from being a sedentary person who doesn't eat any carbs to throwing all these carbs into your body and then trying to go to the gym and lift weights. It's like, of course you're going to have problems. There's no, what's it called? Like a step-by-step process. It's like one step after another. Let's do this first. Let's do that next. So I would say a really good way to train your body to use the glucose and to use the energy is to eat a meal. And then, like you said, do like a 10-minute walk where you're focusing on your breath, helping your digestion, because like literally it's going to be put straight to use if you do that. As opposed to what a lot of people do as well is like they'll just come into this and then they'll eat these massive meals, especially before bed. and then they'll go straight to sleep. So they're not actually like I think I talk about it as like a furnace. Like I think I spoke to you about this before. You don't want to just be putting all this energy in without like enough coal, without enough wood. Like you can't, you know what I mean? Like you have to be doing both sides. You have to be using both of the things to create the furnace. So you need the fuel coming in, and then you need the body to know how to use it. And that's a huge missing piece in the pro-metabolic world, particularly. I think it's the opposite problem with all the other people where I come from. They know how to use everything. They use everything, but they're not giving themselves enough energy. So they're not even feeding, you know what I mean? But there's like, why are we just now focusing only on the inputs and not the output where does it go? It gets stored. Like it's such a simple concept, but you want the output to be smooth, I think, and as least stressful as possible. So the stressful type of output is when you have, those accumulated lactic buildup, you have a lot of inflammation, you have like the nitrate buildup, all that kind of stuff. That's like that's very stressful as far as energy usage on your body. So you want to train your body to use that energy efficiently and use it up really well, and do that in a non-stressful way. And that's where that aerobic base comes into the picture. And when you have your aerobic base, it's always working. It's always working from day to day. You feel more energy because you have more energy. Like you literally have created more energy cells. So I think that, like it's, I don't know. I'd love to, like, I'm not super in on the sciencey side of like the food where like, I would love to learn more about that too, even just when someone goes from not eating very much to eating so much food, but their body is not utilizing that food. What exactly is happening? We know it gets like stored and, but what are they powering their, like it'd be cool to have some studies on that. What are they powering their activity with if all that food's getting stored as fat as well, So I think, I'd be really into that as well, learning about how to use the fuel better that you're eating in terms of, especially someone who's just, because coming from low carb and that, you'd have a whole mixed bag there with having to deal with the activity levels and increasing that, but also being able to handle the carbs that you're eating. So, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And I think you have to go super slow. And I think, the problem is, don't you think as well, like there's these people, so many people have just had no idea what they ate before. So they never took a baseline and then they just go hardcore. They put on weight.
Yeah, of course.
Like sometimes people come to me and I'm like, no, you need to log. It's like you're eating like 3,500 calories. Like, of course you're exhausted. Of course you can't, walk up the hill. Like your body's just like super stressed. You probably were eating 1,000 before.
Yeah. And someone messaged me and she said she finally tracked in chronometer and she sent me a screenshot and I was just like straight away, it was 300 grams of fat in one day. And that's a huge amount of calories. So like you said, it's that understanding of weight, but a gram of fat is a lot more calorie dense than a gram of protein and a gram of carbs. So therefore that just means it's extra energy. Literally, that's what it comes down to. So if we're smashing that much fat, we're smashing so much energy. Like, and then, like I said, where's the balance with the output? Like, why don't we talk about that more? And also, why is it only 2 strength training sessions a week? Or I'm healing still, so I can only do 2 strength training sessions. Like, yeah, but what about movements? You know what I mean? Like maybe you can't go and do 3 or 4 strength training sessions, but where is the rest of the energy being recycled? How is it working? Like what's happening with it? Because if you're not using it, you're storing it. And if you're storing too much, you're going to be gaining weight and it's going to affect, like you said, all the other processes as well. So
coming back to that fat piece, because I think this is really important, because I really recommend for people who have thyroid issues and metabolic issues to stick to like 20 to 25% fat. And then people, and this is crazy, right? Because then you get people who message you like 300 grams of fat. Like that's,
but she didn't mean it. That's the crazy thing.
Oh no, exactly. They don't mean it.
They didn't even know.
No, they don't know. And this is why I get so annoyed with programs where they're like, oh, we don't track. If it's too stressful to track, don't track. And it's like, but you're going to create so much stress for someone.
Yeah.
If they just go eat 300 grams of fat without knowing and give themselves more issues. But so, and Jay and I said it too, he was of the similar thinking. So 20 to 25% fat for people with metabolic issues. and 20 and closer to, 30, 40, you probably can eat 30 to 40% fat, right? Like, because
I usually eat around 25 to 30. Yeah.
So it's going to be different for different people, right? So often with clients, I'll say, well, we're just going to take your fat right back just for a while. Like, it's not forever. And I've noticed as I've gotten better, I can eat more fat. So we want to just talk about that fat aspect and how it affects this whole system and why you need to taper it back for a while.
I think the most important thing is just, your body's what they run on. They need glucose to run on, right? So although we use fat, like your resting muscles use fat, so if you have more muscle, like for example, someone who never weight trains versus someone who weight trains, the person who weight trains is going to be burning more fat just at rest. But, you need glucose just to run on. And a lot of people don't even eat any carbs. So they're coming from like no carbs or super low carbs. And like we said, they're adding all this, fat, they're adding all this glucose, and the body's just like, what do I burn first? So it has to burn. It prefers something. So it has a preference, right? And it's going to pick whatever it's used to burning. So if you're there eating like 100 grams of fat and you're eating like 250 grams of carbs and you've never had carbs before, your body's probably just not going to be okay with those extra carbs, and it's not going to learn how to use them, and it's just going to go back to what it's used to. So it's used to using, your fat, and it's used to turning like your protein into carbs and that, and it's just going to not use those. So we want to lower another fuel source, which is fat, while we're teaching the body and introducing the body to the carbs. If you're keeping that fat up, it's just going to be confused. And I think, I don't know why there's so much backlash towards tracking when it's like, well, you track your weights at the gym. It's like, how are you going to know? Like, how are you going to know what you're doing? How are you going to know what's working? Especially if you're coming from health issues as well, like all these thyroid issues and that, and then you're getting even worse, or you're putting on all this fat. It's like, how are you going to even know what's working and what's not working if you're not tracking? So that's just like, to me, that's just a logical thing completely. But then, I think that we need to slowly, as we're introducing the carbs, particularly, we need to make sure that fat is low, not like super low, because you still need your fat soluble vitamins in that, but you need to have it low enough so that your body has the ability to learn how to use the carbs and learn how to use glucose as energy as well. Because like you're saying, most people are coming from that really low carb background. And then there's that one side, right? But then the other side is literally just calories. Like, it's so simple, but it's like, if you're eating high fat and you're eating high carbs, we can talk about the, metabolism of it all we want. But at the end of the day, you're just eating super high calorie then, and your body is going to put on fat because you're not moving either probably yet, or not that much, because you're still healing from this, thyroid issues and all those other issues. So it's literally just, it's calories. Like, it's so simple. And I think sometimes we also overcomplicate, like your body's it should always be burning some fat, burning some carbs. And like we said about metabolic flexibility and that, but I think sometimes we overcomplicate it when we talk about like the, annual cycle and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I get that, but can we not just ever admit that you're smashing probably 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day? Like, when you're eating, because if you're like, even my 30%, if I'm eating 30% fat, the carbs are going to come down a tiny bit. They're not going to then go up even more. So that's where tracking comes into play. Like, your body needs to learn how to use fuel sources as well. But also, like, you didn't have access to all this stuff back in the day. You had to hunt for everything you ate. You didn't have like endless amounts of milk to drink from like the store. You know what I mean? So, and everyone's all about like fucking ancestors. It's like, well, what do you think they were doing? They weren't smashing 300 grams of fat a day and 600 grams of carbs. Like, they just weren't, they didn't have that available. So like, I think it's just that whole, it's not pro-metabolic this, pro-metabolic that, but it's like, but what about just common sense? Maybe sometimes too.
And I think there's been a huge problem in the health world. Like, even when I did some of the courses I've done, they really like push against tracking. And I find this really interesting because, like, yes, if you only thought of tracking as restrictive,
like dieting,
and it gives you eating disorders, then yes, that's a problem, and I could see why you wouldn't want to track. But that comes from the days where there were people forcing people to only eat like 1,000, 1,200 calories. Like Libby and I are talking about reverse dieting and getting women to eat a lot of food. Like Libby works with athletes and they're eating like 2,700, 3,000 calories because of their output. And I'm working with women who have done so many low carb diets and HCG diets and all kinds of crap to try and heal their hormones and their metabolism, and they're like eating 1,000 calories. And so I think tracking is really powerful because it teaches you something. And if you use something like chronometer and you're like, okay, but look at the minerals in your food, and and I think it's a huge problem. A lot of people coming from other health coaches is if they've never tracked, they just eat way too much fat, because we kind of went, oh, fat's really good for you, so just eat fat. And like you said, it's really calorie dense in ratio to your protein and your carb. It needs to be lower than the other two, so people are super low protein. I'd love you to talk about protein in a second. But if we don't get our heads around, like, I love my tracking because it's like, okay, did I get enough energy and enough nutrients, micronutrients, macronutrients? Like, I love hitting those numbers and going, yes, I did the best for me today.
Yeah.
100%. And then understanding, like when I tell people that my deficit is 1,800 calories or 2,000 calories, they're like, what?
Wow. Yeah.
So if you understood that, healing yourself metabolic healing or whatever you want to call it is about training the system to use fuel more efficiently. And then you start doing caloric deficits to lose weight, because you do have to be in a caloric deficit to lose weight. But if you didn't retrain your system to be metabolically efficient and use all the fuel systems properly, then you would have to do a 1,200 calorie diet to lose weight. That's kind of not what they're understanding.
Bringing it back as well to movement and activity and aerobic work, that actually helps your body utilize energy better as well. And that's just a huge missing piece. So it's also what people aren't understanding is the reason why I can eat 2,800 or 2,700 calories a day, and that's my maintenance, because I have a very high furnace. It burns through them a lot, but that's not just muscle. That's also just, the circulating oxygen, the mitochondria, all of that. Everything is just running faster. So if you have someone like an athlete who is running with everything, it's like not just the output, it's also just the body is running faster, the system's working better, everything's like, moving a lot quicker. So it's, and then you also add muscle to that, which of course adds to it. But I think that I still think that it's just that output discrepancy for a lot of people. And it's output in so many ways. Yeah, it does.
Because I remember when I was PTing, I don't think there was no way I was eating enough. And this is the problem with tracking, right? Like if I hadn't gone down this health thing where you shouldn't track because it's bad for you, I think I would have so many less health issues now, because knowing what I know now, when I was a PT, I would have clocked up 20,000, 25,000 steps a day, no problem. Then I would teach a spin class or take a running group, or, in spin class, you're talking the whole time. So I wasn't pushing myself, but still. So there's heaps of aerobic activity, and then loading your car in and out, with weights, or racking up weights for client all day, putting them away. Then plus doing your own training, I should have been eating 3,000 calories a day, probably 2,500. There's no way I was eating that, because I just had in my head that tracking's bad for you because it causes eating disorders. And if I'm not hungry, then I've eaten enough. But, I can look back at some of my pictures and posts and stuff and go, I just wasn't eating enough.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It just wasn't. So maybe that's why I've had so many problems now. And yes, I can blame mold and I can, say I had a baby or whatever, but I think most
But you had years of probably under eating without even realizing it.
Yeah. And I was that person who was like, oh, I'll go for a run because I need to clear my head, and, a sprint and do all this AMRAP stuff. And, because that was fed to me through the fitness industry, that was healthy. So I was an adrenaline junkie, and I never actually sat down and went, well, how much? I remember I actually did log once, and I went, oh, I ate like 1,800 calories in one day. And I was like, oh,
yeah,
that's not enough food.
Yeah. It's amazing. I would probably have been similar in a lot of my CrossFit days as well, just not intentionally, because I never really tracked much. And I was just not intentionally eating enough, because you've got to be intentional about it if you want to be an active person or an athlete, right? So there's that other side as well, like a lot of people. And that's huge too. That's probably just a big piece to the puzzle is like the input.
Yeah.
As in, you know, are you eating enough? Are you eating enough of the right things? Are you eating enough carbs, proteins, and fats, right? And then there's obviously that other piece of the puzzle, which is your output. And that aerobic base is like, how much ability do you have to actually utilize the energy that you're eating? And if you think about it like I'm like a car, I don't know if this is going to make sense because I'm not good
I
with
love
cars,
using the car.
but I feel like you can have a really nice car and it's like a healthy body. And then the fuel that you put in is obviously like the expensive, you would put expensive fuel in, which is like really good quality, nutrient dense foods, like the foods we recommend people eat, and for your liver and oysters and all that, your minerals. And then you can have all that. But if your engine is really, really small, you're not going to be able to, like, you're not going to be able to utilize much fuel, right? So the engine, I feel, is then your aerobic base. Like if you have a good aerobic base, you have a nice big engine, you can utilize a lot of fuel. And then I would say probably like your anaerobic type stuff is like your accelerator. So you make sure your accelerator works. You can sprint, you can be athletic, you can all that kind of stuff. So I feel like, you know, you need to not just think about that one part, because who's going to go and buy a super fancy car that has like the smallest engine in the world? You know what I mean? You're going to make sure that you're looking at all these different parts. And it's the same with our physiology. Like it's not just about the input, and that's what so many people get wrong. So whether it's too little or too much, it's the other
and the timing as well. Like I feel like the timing people just don't get, like with all this like green smoothies in the morning and fasting and all this stuff. Like, but if you use up most of your energy in the morning, why would you eat most of your food at nighttime? Like, so if you are driving in your car and the red light comes on, you don't go, oh, I'm on a fast and I'm not going to put petrol until 6. Like your car would just stop. So, you know, I think for a lot of women, it's the timing as well, and just actually putting quite a lot of food in the morning and having way less food in the evening. Well, I have my dinner at 5 o'clock, you know, and then a snack.
I'm really big with you on that. I agree with you. Like I'm big on that, because too many people are eating massive meals right before bed, and this reflects in your heart rate variability as well, because it lowers it, because your body has to get, it's just a bit stressed. So it can't go into like those deep sleep and that REM sleep stages, which is where all that recovery happens. And you can release, like my heart rate variability, if I eat too close to my sleep, is like a lot lower. And that's telling me, what's heart rate variability is telling you? It's telling you you're in a sympathetic state. So you're not fully able to recover. And like, it makes sense, because you want your food to fuel you for the day as well. Why are we starving and not fueling and then eating at 2 p.m.? Like that's most of your day gone. It's illogical.
The fasting window, yes, I agree, you need to have a fasting window, but like from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. is way better than 11 p.m. till 2, like 11 p.m. till 2 p.m. Like, so it's just moving around. But I think what's really good to talk about here is biomarkers that we use, physiological markers, because what I can hear people going is, oh no, but Libby, I went for a walk and then I was swollen afterwards. Or, you know, like at some point you have to implement stress. And this is what people are so afraid of, stress. They're like, I can't use a food diary because it stresses me out too much. And I go into that stress thing and I'm trying to get better from a stress problem, so I can't use a food diary.
I hear that one a lot. That's crazy. Like probably the most I've heard that out of everything is like, I can't track because it's too stressful. That's the number one reason, which I don't know if that's the real reason sometimes, but I agree with you. And I think that you could even look at anything in life. Like stress is basically stress is where the growth happens, right? And I think that a lot of people also misinterpret healing as growth, but healing is not growth. Healing is just getting you back to a normal. So healing is getting you back to where you should be. It's not growth. So you can heal all you want, but once you get to that point and you're back to where you should be, then there comes a point where you're going to have to increase some stress in order to grow, if you want to grow. And growth can be anything, right? Growth can be like, you know, building muscle. Growth can be mentally growing. Growth can be improving your life, improving your environment, everything. So I think that people think sometimes like this healing journey that never ends, because it's like good to be healing, but it's like, we don't always want to be healing, right? Healing means you're coming from a deficit of something into a normal place. When you're through, like, once you're healed, well, not entirely healed, but once you focused on healing, that's when it's time to slowly introduce stressors, because otherwise you're just going to get super intolerant to any stress at all. And then that's not living as well. So yeah, I think there's that misinterpretation that people are on this healing journey, but it's just this never ending healing journey. But that's, if you think about it, I always try to remind my clients, healing is not growing. Healing is super important, but it's not growth. It's not results. It's literally just getting you back to normal where you should be, because stuff is fucked up in your life and you've been in this, like, you've had health problems, you've had issues. So I think that they're scared of the stress because they're worried that they've come this far with healing and then the stress is going to take them back to that place. But they have to change their mindset and realize that if it's done, really slowly, and you introduce it and you build up things as you do it, like you build up the recovery aspects while you're introducing the stress, it's only going to take you into growth. It's not going to take you backwards. And
I think it's really important, like, just to stop you there for a second, because I hear a lot of people say that I can only eat the foods on the pro-metabolic list. Otherwise I have flare-ups or stress or inflammation or whatever. I don't feel that's healed. It's like I can only be the weight that I want to be at if I eat 1,700 calories. Like that's not healed. That's just, I'm just healed. Using something to keep me in a state so I don't get more stressed. So, like, I want to be able to eat green vegetables and peanut butter. Like, I don't know, every time I do it on Instagram, people are like, oh my God, that's really bad for your thyroid. Like, dude,
I used to get more of that. I think people are used to me now. Hashtag rebel.
I know, like, this peanut butter is really good. But, like, I can go into a moldy house and not, like, have a total,
have your body.
I used to, like, have all my skin crawl and feel like spiders are crawling. I can go and have dinner at a friend's house who lives in a moldy house. I'm not going to go to my friend, I can't come to your house. Like, I don't want to be like that. So I can't go out for dinner. Like, recently I've just been able to drink alcohol again. And it's so cool because it's not like, not that I'm going to get, like you would say, white girl wasted. But it just shows me that my body's, like, able to deal with stress. So I'm going to go 10 bottles of wine, but I could have 2 or 3 drinks with the dinner and go, oh, okay, cool. Like,
I'm fine.
I'm fine. I can eat weird things. Like, I can go out for dinner and I don't get bloated and constipated and can't sleep. Like, I think we have to be really specific about, if you have to do something to stop yourself from feeling bad, then you're not really healed. Recovered.
Yeah. And I think, I can't really speak from personal experience with this, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that sometimes people even turn their whole identity into their sickness, or they turn, like, I can speak in terms from, like, psychological or, like, past traumas and stuff. But a lot of people seem to just turn their traumas into their identity, and it's almost like that's who they are. So therefore, I'm sorry, I'm intolerant to that. I can't do that. No, I can't do that. And it's like, I'm only good if I'm doing this. And I even see it sometimes with people like, don't eat any starch. You shouldn't eat any starch. It's like, why? What's the real reason? They're like, oh, because of this. I'm like, but my body digests it fine, so I'm going to eat it. Like, I feel really good with it, So it's almost like they hold on to different aspects of their, either whatever they heard from someone that they need to do, or their personal trauma or their sickness. And it's this changing your identity. And I think changing your identity is a super, super hard thing to do. And we struggle with it in every different area of life, because in order to get to, it's actually my business coach who told me that. And it really, like, it was like a light bulb for me. He said, in order to get to that next level in your life, whatever that is, you have to be convinced that you are that person. So your identity has to change along with whatever it is that you're doing. So if you're always holding on to this identity of sickness, or you're always holding on to this identity, for example, in my case, maybe my identity is that I can't possibly charge more money, or I can't possibly change my program, or I can't possibly get more clients. I'm just at this place where I am now, and it's who I am. I have to change my identity to believe that I can actually do those things and I can actually be that other person. And I think that identity holds people back because they don't think they can push to that next level. And that's where the stress comes in as well. You know, not only as you introduce the healthy stress, you have to also make sure that your identity is following along
100%.
with that. Yeah. And he gave me this example. He's like, if you're trying to climb a mountain, you need to change your identity at different spots as you go. You can't expect to go, you know, when people climb mountains, they put that, you know, stepping thing there, and then they move it up a little bit and they step on that, and then they move it up a little bit and they step on that, and then they get to the top. Whereas if you thought that you could step on, you know, that and then you could go straight to the top, you would never believe that that's possible. So you have to have like little incremental stressors, if that makes sense, little incremental stresses as you're bringing your identity along with you for the ride. So your new identity is this person, and then your new identity is healed. Your new identity is, hey, I can actually eat pasta. It doesn't do anything to me. I'm not scared of it anymore. So, you know, you're not going to go and smash it every day, but that's your new identity. So you've opened yourself up to the possibility that you can be completely fine with all foods, for example. So yeah, I think that's also the identity thing, like with trauma and all that as well.
100%. It goes with everything, right? Like I've actually been doing some posts on this coming up. I don't know if you've read Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. You would love this book. And he's a plastic surgeon, and he goes into the whole psychology of like you could give people the best facelift ever and they'd still look in the mirror and be really unhappy.
They're ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all about if you want to achieve a goal, you have to be the person and do what they do in order to have that goal. It's exactly what you're talking about. And, you know, so that's food prep, and that's, you know, like you have to have a little bit of stress. You have to get uncomfortable. You have to put in new routines. So, yeah, it's a really interesting book. It helped me a lot too with my business. Same. So I say Libby and I wouldn't struggle with food logging, and we wouldn't struggle with getting to the gym and training and stuff like a lot of our clients too. But yeah, there's definitely other things, whether it's relationship stress and money stress and business stress and stuff. There's always stuff. But yeah, with biomarkers, because I think it's really important. So clients will say to me, so we want to have a stress response from the things that we do, because stress is like Libby said. So you go to the gym, you break the muscle. That's what training is. And then the body uses its resources to repair the muscle and grow it bigger. So I think, so how much stress can we implement? How long should, you know, what are you using with clients? How long should they be in a stress state for? Because after training, you're going to be in a stress state because you want that inflammation. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So it depends. Like, obviously there's also like tolerance levels. So how much, and also like a stress for me, like lifting 3 times a week is not as stressful as for someone else. So you've got to start with where your body's at and then introduce the stress from there. So I would say, you know, if you're training and you're really training with progressive overload, you're breaking down muscle basically. So that's catabolic. So you have to your body has to go into a catabolic or a stress state in order to perform the training. So you need that stress, right? When you come out of the stressed state, your body has to heal the inflammation. So it has to do all its processes inside to get rid of the inflammation. And then from there, it turns it into, you know, new muscle growth and all that. So it turns it into the anabolic processes. You need to be able to handle the stress of not only the training session, but you need to be able to handle the stress of the inflammation in your body, which comes from the training. Obviously, we can talk about like certain types of training cause more inflammation. Like if you're doing a lot of, you know, eccentric training, like where that's the eccentric part of the muscle is like a lot more inflammatory. So certain movements do more than others, but you do need to be able to handle the inflammation and be able to have your own body turn that inflammation, switch it off, turn it into, you know, the recovery phase. Now, I feel like a lot of people can't handle, well, they can do the training session or whatever, but they can't handle that inflammation because they just don't. So the inflammation stays. That would be like soreness, DOMS, right? It just continues on, and, you know, poor sleep, all these signs that they're just in that inflammatory state. So the body can't switch out of it. That's where the aerobic system comes in really, really handy, because if you have a well-developed aerobic system, moderately developed, I won't say well-developed, your body you can go into that aerobic system, you can go into that aerobic state quickly. And as soon as you're in that aerobic state, your body starts the recovery process. That's not an inflammatory state. So being able to come out of the stress of training and that sympathetic state and being able to flip that switch, even during your cool down, and come into that recovery state, that anabolic state, is where the magic happens. And that's also where everyone gets stuck. So it's building that stress tolerance. That's why I say building that aerobic base is a really good idea to do that first. But, there's also aspects to it mentally. There's all that as well. It's like, having more discipline in your life, being able to, like you said, have a routine, like not obviously to the extreme where some people go, but, being able to track your food, be a disciplined person, like that's training your body that these stressors, your brain doesn't like them first. It's uncomfortable with them, but it's training your body to realize that these are the normal things. This is routine. This is how it should be, right? So your body doesn't freak out at the first sign of stress. So it's like a little bit of that mental approach as well, that mindset side, that behavioral change. But then it's also building in that stress tolerance, that stress resilience, and, that work capacity, which comes from the aerobic base. So I would say developing that aerobic base, super important. Then, start with, 1 session, 2 sessions a week. And a really big key as well is with soreness and all that is frequency. So if you can, rather than doing one crazy all out strength session where you're pushing the weights and you're trying to smash PBs, do like 3 sessions with less intensity on the muscle groups, like 3 full body sessions. Get your muscles used to the stress of training, because if you only do one muscle group like quads and then you don't train again until the next week, it's not that much. Sorry, am I cutting out or am I fine still?
No, you're good.
Okay, sorry. It's not that much stress on the muscle. So then your muscle doesn't really adjust. It doesn't really, get used to it. So I really like to use higher frequency with beginners to strength training. And I like to use full body a lot of times, because then we can repeat that same muscle group in that same week and not going like crazy heavy yet. So it's about building that stress in, but not running away from the stress, making sure that there's enough frequency there and enough, your body needs to get used to it. It needs to adjust, just like carbs, it needs to get used to it. So I think, that would be key with strength training.
So like with temps and pulse, HRV, all those kinds of things, you would expect to see them get a little bit worse after training, right?
Yeah. So particularly with temps and pulse, like I would expect if you're first starting out, your temps are going to lower the next day, because your body doesn't really know how to just flip that switch and get straight back into the recovery state right away. As you get used to it, as you get used to training and accustomed to it, like my temps won't change if I train hard. My pulse is generally pretty much the same, my resting pulse, unless my heart rate variability is lowered for some reason, which is usually the first sign of stress to me. But when you're starting out, you've kind of there's like a balance, which is, it's hard, because even with fat loss phases, it's hard with clients sometimes, because there's a balance. Like that's where also then being really honest is important, because you don't want to be seeing like your temps drop that much continuously. But you do want to see, if it drops, that you have the ability for it to rise again, like on that 3rd day. So let's say you train and then the 2nd day it's lower, and then the 3rd day you're like, we're back up. That's like a really good sign, because what that means is that you're not stuck in that freeze state and you're actually gone from sympathetic back to parasympathetic. So even if it takes time, even if it takes 2-3 days, it's not going to kill you to be in a under recovered state. It's all training and it's all teaching your body. But what I would be looking out for is that continuous drop in temperature. Continuous sleep problems is another really big one. Like a lot of people they really struggle with sleep after training. They can't get their heart rate down. So they're in that sympathetic state in their sleep as well. So if that's just one night you don't sleep well and then you're back up again, that's good. That's like really good. Don't freak out, It's like letting your body feel that stress, letting your body react like it's under stress, and then watching and being curious and seeing what it does, rather than, oh my God, my body's under stress, I can't do this anymore. It's like changing the mindset about it, because again, it's your body. Your body's like, it does what it wants to do. You can just sit there and be curious and adjust accordingly, but you don't want to I think Jessica Ash always says this as well. We can't control everything. Like when women freak out about their monthly cycle, you can't control that. That's literally your brain telling your hormones what to do. Like you just got to work with it as best as you can.
And I think always having that reminder is that, yeah, you're using your recovery to teach your body how to come back down from stress, especially because people have been living in this constant state of stress all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's the same like when you do a deficit, like so many people just live in a deficit. Like I was living in a deficit. So you can't just say, I'm never going to do a deficit again.
Yeah.
Because you'll never lose weight if you never do a deficit again. But it's like you talk about living in like how much of your year in maintenance calories.
Yeah.
And even surpluses are a stress, right? And building muscles is stress. So it's about consistently teaching your body to come back to homeostasis in between bouts of stress, which is what a lot of people have never had. And some people have never experienced that entire life. Like I had a pretty traumatic childhood. I've probably never actually had homeostasis growing up, which is what part of my problem is, right? Mm-hmm. So you're so addicted to that adrenaline and because it feels safe, it's comfortable, you know. Mm-hmm. I remember like pushing through food for the whole day for meetings and stuff was more work comfortable than like everybody sit down and eat and, you know. So I think we have to redefine what stress is and not think of all stress as bad.
Yeah. Well, it's so true what you're saying. It's like a good life to me consists of the ebbs and the flows, the stress, and then the relaxation, you know, the recovery. Like, and if you look at an animal, right? Like because I'm obsessed with like these Instagram accounts of like, you know, nature is metal and these ones, because it just shows you like raw nature and raw what animals do. And they don't have the same part of the brain that we have that, you know, like questions and is like, oh, I don't want to do that. And that they just do literally what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like biologically. And if you watch an animal chase, so say you watch like a lion or some animal hunt another animal, the one that's being hunted, right? You can see that stress response. You can see that fight or flight. And then you can see all the things happen with their tail and you can just see it all. And it's like all that natural fight or flight state. And then as soon as the threat is gone, if they don't get eaten, like if the lion's gone or whatever, they literally, you can see them go back. They'll go like prance over and they'll just sit down in the shade, right? So they're going back into the parasympathetic state. They don't have this like free state. They don't have any of that because theirs is just purely biological. It's just what they were made to do, right? So if we can get our bodies to be more like that, that's what our biological body wants to do. But we've got all this crazy stuff coming at us all the time. And, you know, we've got like, you know, trauma to deal with and all this kind of stuff to deal with. So I think it's just realizing that that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have the stressors and we're supposed to be able to get back into the recovery state and the ebbs and the flows in life. And I also don't think it's healthy to have a life with no stress or to hide and run away from all stress too, or to be so afraid of like foods and so afraid of exercise and so afraid of something as simple as going for a run. Like, to me, being a well-adapted human is able to do those things in the right amount and just recover from them. You're fine. You're a human person. You don't have to always be scared of stress. Like, you know, you can, like, you look at that animal, he was so stressed. He was probably petrified for his life, but then rolled off his back and he's sitting in the shade, deep breaths, no problems, acting like nothing ever happened. So I think being able to get to that place is more healthy than either, like you said, running on stress all the time, which is so many people are doing that, or being so afraid of stress that we're hiding from everything and we're not fully like living as well.
Well, that becomes another stress in itself, right? Because you'll see people who are, you know...
Well, it's parasympathetic dominance. And that if you're too much like that, that's not healthy either.
No. And they're like, I've got to go to 3 acupuncture sessions a week and I've got to do this and, you know, I've got something scheduled in every day. Oh, that's like sometimes clients come to me and they've got a chiropractor and a physio and an acupuncturist and And it's like, this is like a full-time job, just keeping up with all of these appointments. And literally you have to ask yourself, like, do you want to get better or are you really attached to this routine? But all of these people, like none of them have ever spoken to each other. So it's like if I had a client that came from you, I would call you straight away and say, what's the deal? What are you working on? Yeah. Like, you know, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And same with the chiros and physios and stuff that I work with, because otherwise you're just like, you know, Libby could be saying eat more carbs, and I'm like, have thyroid hormone. And I was like, well,
yeah, exactly.
They're two totally different things. And that's just going to be more stressful for the person. But I think a lot of people go from, I used to work really hardcore and I train really hardcore, but now I do self-help really hardcore and alternative therapy hardcore.
Yeah.
So it's just a different rung. But anyway, I hope this really helps people, because I feel like people are really stuck in that freeze and that I just can't exercise, I can't do anything, I can't log, I can't, it's realizing that stuff takes time and stuff is uncomfortable at first. Like logging is uncomfortable at first. Like I remember when you were doing your macro challenge and you were like, okay, choose a level.
Yeah.
You were like, choose a level. If you've never tracked before, choose this level. How many people chose that level? Do you reckon?
Many people chose the hardest level and they didn't even do it. So it's like...
Yeah, so you just like set yourself up to fail. It was like, I think the first level was just track your protein every day, right? Because so many women under-eat protein.
So many.
Like just do that one thing, one small thing. Yeah. Just walk 2,000 steps. Just get up. Like I said to a client the other day, just get up every 90 minutes. Set your phone every 90 minutes. Get up and do 250 steps. Don't even worry about making time to go for a walk, nothing. And just hit your protein target every day. That's it. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh no, but it's not hard enough, and it's not like...
I know, I totally get that. It's like the stress has to be super stressful or it doesn't count. It's like, no, incrementally add stressors and you'll be so much better off.
Yeah. And this is like, I think, a lot of people message us on Instagram and Facebook or whatever, and I think it's like, if you just invest the time to sit down with a coach, which I think is another addiction as well, because you're just like, I'm going to ask 25 people on Instagram what their opinion is, and then I'm going to be overwhelmed by all their opinions and not actually focus on one thing and do one thing. Like getting coaching can just be so valuable. Like even for me last week going, oh my God, I just did a cut and my temperatures dropped, so I know I have to go back to maintenance, but should I put on muscle or should I do another cut? And I'm like, why would I bother spinning my wheels when I could just go, Libby, I'm going to pay you for your time. Can you please sit down and help me work out a game plan for the year instead of spinning my wheels and getting myself more stressed out about what I should and shouldn't do? And because there's like a million ways to skin a cat, right? As well.
Yeah. And there's also that overwhelm that you just need. Like sometimes you just need someone to take an outside perspective and just tell you this is what's going on. Otherwise you just keep circulating that overwhelm in your brain. So I think coaching is it's so important.
Well, I think what I really get to from you and talking to other people who are really helpful, like Kitty and stuff, is a reminder of what's real for me.
Yeah.
Because when you're an overachiever, it's like, no, you're trying to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I say this to all the mums, like maybe it's not realistic for you to go to the gym until your kids all go to school.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's not realistic.
For you. Trade-offs in life as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if your husband just chipped in enough for you to do your 10,000 steps every day, that's enough.
Yeah. Makes a huge difference as well.
Because if you want to be a stay-at-home mum and you want to, or whatever you want to do, like you can't have everything all at the same time. So I find it really helpful because, you've had your daughter and like, you just like.
Just that perspective from someone else. Yeah. I agree. So helpful.
So helpful in all areas of your life. It's just you're never alone. I think it's always getting it from like you've got a business coach at the moment, and like it's just about how do I do things more efficiently and stop wrestling with your ego and thinking about all the things that you should be or should have done. And
yeah, I think the main thing that you're saying as well that is really true with everything, even business and that, is breaking it down and just thinking, what's the next step? Like, I've got all these goals, I've got all these dreams. What's my next thing that's going to move the needle the most to my goals? And that's the same with health. It's like for those mums, your next thing that's going to move the needle is not trying to fit in one training session a week and barely doing it. It's doing 10,000 steps a day. That's going to be a huge, huge thing for your health, for everything. And it's going to set you up for like, the next thing you want to do. So having that coach just tell you that it's helpful, because we can get lost sometimes in all our goals and dreams. And we don't look at that next step. And so like, every day when I wake up, what's the one thing that I need to accomplish today that's my non-negotiable? You know, the same with health, the same with fitness. Like that 10,000 steps is my non-negotiable. I don't, you know, if everything else goes out the window, what are those things I'm going to fall back on? And I think that's really important to have too.
And I think it's realizing too that just because you ask for help doesn't mean you don't know what to do. Like your business is amazing. Like I've done been in your program and seen it all. And I have clients that I send to your program and they all do super well. So you're going to get a business coach. It's not like, oh, my business is crap. Yeah. Or it's not like because I went to have coaching with Libby means that I'm really crap at, you know, coaching nutrition and other people. It's not what it means. It's like, I actually want to get out of my own head. I want to level up. I want to be more successful. That's why athletes have coaches. Like they've been professional athletes for 10 years and they still have coaches.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think it's important in all areas of life.
Yeah. So you guys can use your recovery.
I have a free
handout.
Yeah. They can download that. That's good. That goes really well with everything we talked about today.
Yeah.
And like building it slowly as well.
Yeah, so jump onto Libby's website and have a look at her recovery handbook. All of my clients have downloaded it, and which is really cute because so many of them come, well, Libby said, I was like, well, she also said, just walk first.
That's funny.
No, it's really cute. All my clients love Libby. They're like, oh my God, I did Libby's thing and it's amazing. You're like the poster, like the pin-up girl. Like all my girls are like, oh my, when my thyroid gets better, I can go. And I'm like, yeah, go work with Libby. And they're like, I want to look like Libby. I'm like, yeah, but you have to do all this work first, and then you can go.
It's cute.
Yeah, it is cute. It is cute. We have a good little circle. So I'm so grateful that you came on today, Libby. I love chatting with you.
I know. I loved it again.
Now we just have to think of our next topic. So if you've
always a good time and it's always easy, so whatever.
Oh, so good. So if you've listened to this episode, check out Libby's aerobic recovery handout, a free download. I'd love it if you shared this episode on Instagram if you feel like it could help some people, because I think there's a lot of people overdoing exercise, just missing some really key important pieces. And let us know if there's another topic that you would like Libby and I to cover. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Libby.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm Leila Lutz, and you've been listening to The Body Never Lies. If you haven't yet, please go to your favourite podcast app and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. All the resources and references from this episode are waiting for you on my website, leilalutz.com. Just click on podcast and look for this episode. Now join me next week for another episode of The Body Never Lies. Thank you so much for listening.